Hey guys, welcome to House Groups tonight. We're so glad that you're with us. We're going to dive into a story in Scripture tonight about Jesus meeting someone, and a few people actually, in a really tough spot. It is so important for us to be open and honest about the things that we struggle with, the things that we walk through, the challenges, the hardships that we face. And it's extremely important for us to be able to do that with each other in small groups and in the church. And so often I feel like it seems like there are subjects that are taboo to talk about within the church. But we want to just completely break down all of those walls tonight, because we face really hard things. And we walk through things that are super challenging and cause us to struggle immensely. And Jesus is able to meet us in that spot. Sometimes it means that Jesus provides people for us to walk through a struggle with, whether it's a therapist or a doctor, our parents or our friends. Jesus provides people to be with us in those tough spaces, but it means that we need to let people into those spaces too. When I was in high school, I struggled a lot, and still do struggle a lot, with perfectionism and wanting to be perfect, wanting to look perfect, wanting to have perfect grades, wanting everybody around me to think that my life was perfect. And during the summer in between my junior and senior year, that took an even bigger step, I guess, and made itself known in my life even more, because I thought my body didn't look perfect anymore. And so I started eating less and less calories during the week so that the number on the scale would be exactly what I wanted it to be and be what I thought was a perfect weight. I stayed in that place, in that mental place of wanting to be perfect and knowing that thinking that I needed to have this specific number when I stepped on the scale. But I also remember having God's voice in my head telling me who I was, telling me that I was created in His image, telling me that I was perfect just the way I was, no matter what the number on the scale was or how I looked, that He had made me wonderfully and fearfully, and that I was His child. And that the perfectionist in me and God's voice in me totally conflicted with each other, because it was really hard to listen to God's voice and not just want to fit into this mold that I had been put in high school. But God met me in that place. And I didn't share that story with a lot of people. I didn't tell people necessarily. And I knew that God met me in that place, but it wasn't until later that I started sharing that and talking about it with people. And in that space, in those Bible studies and friendships in my life, those people reinforced the voice of God in my life and the message of God in my life to help me know that I am made beautiful and made perfect just the way that I am, no matter what I look like, what size jeans I wear, or what the scale tells me. And so I still fight some of those thoughts today, but I try and turn more and more towards the truth of who I am, the truth of who I was created to be, and listen for God in that space.
I think what strikes me as I look at my life today is how much of it is both building on or recovering from when I was your age or younger. And for me, there are a lot of different paths that people have to struggle with. In my life, that was telling the truth. My dad was a real salesperson, and there was never a story that could not or should not be embellished, or reality was just sort of a concept that if it helps you, good, and if not, don't worry about it. Great guy, but not a great person of the truth. My brothers and I grew up in that kind of environment where my mom yelled up the stairs one time, "You know, you kids that lie with the truth, it'd fit better." And my brother turned to me and said, "You know, she's right. Sometimes I just practice." And that's the environment that I grew up in, trying to shade things so that I look better, or make up stories, or not tell the truth when things got hard. And then when I came to Jesus, that was still completely true. That was still who I was and what I struggled with and frankly still struggle with. Not to exaggerate, to make myself look good, to tell the hard truth when it's not convenient, or to keep quiet instead of saying something bad. It's going to be, I'm sure, a lifelong battle. I admire my wife, who grew up in a family of truth tellers and doesn't struggle with that, because I know that I can trust what she says, and I want her to be able to trust everything that I say. It's a lifelong battle. Let me give you just one hint. As an adult, I was going to have a tough conversation, and a consultant came to me and said, "You know what helps me, John?" I stop at the door and I say, "I'm a child of the King. I have nothing to lose, and I have nothing to prove. Now take a deep breath." And just that little exercise has been a good step on the way for me, but I'm still not there. Maybe you have something similar in your life.
As a pastor, sometimes when you move somewhere, it's easy to think, I should have friends, right? These people should like me because I'm a pastor at this church. And yet there's always this part of you, and we experienced this just last year because we just moved to Minneapolis. We experienced, are we gonna fit in? Are people gonna like us? Will we have friends? And there's a sense of loneliness and isolation that you wrestle with. And it goes down more than just friends, it goes down to the core of who you are. Am I worth loving? Am I worth having friendships with? Am I cool enough to fit in? As you get older, those things don't go away. They take different forms. You hide them somehow, and yet you still, every time you have to make a new group of friends, every time you move, every time you feel socially isolated, you're wrestling with, will I fit in? Am I gonna be lonely? Will I have friends? These are things that will continue to come back over the course of your life. And as we've moved different places in the country, we've always had to wrestle with this. Will we actually be able to make good friendships? Will we feel like we belong and fit in a place?
So when I was in high school and well throughout my early 20s, I never struggled with anxiety. I was very confident. I felt very strong in everything that I did, and it wasn't until probably within the last couple of years, my later 20s, that anxiety all of a sudden just hit me hard. And it is something that I still to this day am working through and trying to figure out what it's coming from and why it pops up in the most random ways. But it's something that I have come to learn is maybe just part of my story, and it's part of this stage in life that I'm at. And I think for me, what I've learned through this process is that I really believe that God is showing up for me in my life and walking me through this process through people. And so I have been seeing a counselor who I love, and I see her started every other week, and now it's gone to about once a month. And she has just helped me so much kind of process through my emotions and my feelings, and helping me recognize and be able to acknowledge that it's okay to have anxiety and it's okay to be anxious about things, and that it doesn't define who I am. It doesn't say a lot about my story and give me this image that I don't want, even though that's something that I struggle with, not wanting to be labeled as an anxious person and not wanting to be pitied for that. I've seen God show up a lot in just friendships and my relationship with my counselor. I think through new friendships and just being honest about where I'm at in life has just broken down these walls, not only for myself, but for other people around me. And so my friends who struggle with anxiety too, we have been able to almost bond over it in a weird way, to the point where now we can send each other really funny memes that are out there on the internet about anxiety, and we can laugh and we can cry and we can just be there for each other and not feel bad about it because we know that we're in it together, and that God is really doing work in us and through us, and through our friendship too.
When I was in high school and in college, anxiety and depression were things that other people had. It was for people who had just gone through something traumatic, or maybe for people who were in broken families, or something that was just going really, really bad in their life. But after I took my first job after college, I found myself feeling these anxious feelings and feeling myself paralyzed by it. And I remember thinking, there's nothing traumatic. I didn't go through anything traumatic. This can't be it. And so I kind of lived thinking that I couldn't be someone that had anxiety. And furthermore, people in ministry and people that are supposedly close with God, they're not supposed to be anxious. God's supposed to make it all okay for them. But what I've learned relatively lately is that that's not the case. In fact, God is actually walking with us through that, and people who are Christians and are faithful and people who are just regular people can have these feelings of anxiety, and it's not something they've done anything wrong, but instead something that God wants to walk with them through.
This may not come as a surprise to some of you, but I have ADD. And actually, I didn't get diagnosed with ADD until a couple years ago. So it was after I'd already graduated college, which is kind of a funny time to get diagnosed because oftentimes it's, when your grades start slipping, when you're in school, that's kind of the first sign that you go get checked. But I was always a pretty good student, but I always had to work really, really hard at getting good grades and at staying on top of things because it just didn't come naturally to me. And I think part of me always knew that it was likely that I had ADD, but I didn't want to go in and get diagnosed because I thought the second that I went in and was diagnosed with ADD, that would be the label that would define who I am, and that people wouldn't see me as Trevor, they would see me as Trevor, the kid with ADD. And so I also didn't really know who I could talk to about it, and so I just kind of kept quiet. And I was able to get decent grades and be a good student, but I had to work really, really hard at it. And after I got diagnosed with ADD and worked with my doctor on the right treatment and the right dosage for medication and different things like that, now looking back, I realize, man, if I had done this earlier, I think I could have made a lot of things a lot easier on myself. So I read this sentence in an article that somebody posted online yesterday, and I think it is really true for me in the way that I feel, and it says this: I wish Christians talked more about mental illness. If they did, maybe I could have saved myself the exhaustion of pretending I was okay. It's an unfortunate reality that talking about challenging things doesn't happen in church nearly as much as it should. There's this pressure to only put our best foot forward, to only show other people our best. And that when we walk into church or into youth group or into house groups, that we should, act like we have everything together. But Jesus doesn't want to just see the good things in our life. Jesus wants to be present with us in everything. He wants to be with us in the good, in the bad, and in the challenging. So tonight you'll be reading a story about Jesus performing a miracle where he brings his friend Lazarus back from the dead. And before you go into small groups to talk about that, I actually wanted to quick mention something that happens very early on in the passage you'll be reading tonight. In verse 33, Jesus is arriving, and Lazarus has actually already been dead for a few days. And so there are people there who are weeping and mourning the death of Lazarus. And there's this interesting phrase that gets used in verse 33 that I wanted to point out. Verse 33 says this: When Jesus saw her weeping, and this is talking about Mary, so when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Now there's a phrase in there, greatly disturbed in spirit, which isn't a phrase that we would use today, but it has this, it implies an anger. It implies a really intense feeling of being really angry. And it's not necessarily that Jesus is angry at the people that are weeping and mourning, because it also says that he was deeply moved, and a few verses later, Jesus is crying with these people. So it's clear that he's not mad at these people, but I was reading, and one pastor described this phrase by saying the following: It means that Jesus wasn't so much sad at the scene surrounding the tomb of Lazarus. It's more accurate to say that Jesus was angry. Jesus was angry and troubled at the destruction and power of the great enemy of humanity, death. Jesus is angry because he sees the ways that the brokenness and sin of this world affect us. Death isn't supposed to happen. And anytime Jesus sees us struggling with anxiety or depression or ADD or feeling like we don't measure up or we're not good enough, it breaks his heart because he loves us so much and he knows that he has better things in store for us. And he wants us to be honest not only with him about those things, but he also wants us to come around one another and love each other and be honest with each other when things are hard in life and be able to support one another in that. So tonight, I hope and pray that your small group can be a place to wrestle through these things and talk about the ways that Jesus might be with you in the challenging areas of life, whatever that might look like for you. And so, thank you so much for listening, you guys, and have a great night in small groups.